That music, Greenery Rain, was from A Garden of Words, a Japanese anime drama film made in 2013. It's the story of a troubled 15-year-old shoemaker, Takao Azizuki, who meets a mysterious woman, Yukari Yuniko, in the Shinjuku Gardens in Tokyo. And over many meetings in the gardens, they learn to walk in life. Once again, a story of the value and the meanings that the gardens have and can have in our lives. Good afternoon. I'm Aniket Bhagwat, and on behalf of all of us at LEAF, welcome you to the final episode of Saturday Sojourns, Modern Landscape Architecture in India. It's been 6 weeks of wonderful conversations, and today we are at its end. The webinar series is something that was conceptualized about 2.5 months ago. It was designed with a few questions in mind. How has the profession evolved since the first generation of landscape architects who designed it in the 1950s? We looked at this evolution not necessarily in terms of outcomes, but in terms of process, design philosophy, and the principles that guide the practices of today. Practices that in the times to come will guide the trajectory of the profession in the country. We sent out a call requesting colleagues from across the country to send in their work to be a part of this initiative. 12 firms then were invited. There could have been many more that we could have called in. For the past 5 weeks, we have had 2 firms presenting to you, our audiences. These presentations acted as tools for conversations on representation, experiencing the land, on defining the profession and the professional, on setting expectations and boundaries, about the joys of planting design, or of landscape design as a discipline to make healing environments. And then conversations on the many approaches to practicing design and the many ways in which designers must navigate the ideas of boundaries, ideas of permanence, the ideas of wilderness, and then the ideas of change. We also attempted to address the idea of belongingness, of identity, of recognizing and building value. In the previous session with Dipti Chandra and Anuradha Rathod, we talked about what can influence a landscape designer, memories of childhood, places that one travels, about communicating symbolism in a manner that is tangible and simple and adept, about working with your hands, and about perception of spaces, but also about grasping what we call the thick middle of the practice and being adept at it, and from it drawing lessons that can improve the urban and the ecological environment. And today, for the final session of the series, to give us some more food for thought, we are joined by our last 2 firms, Bāghorama and Studio Roots, both firms from Pune. Bāghorama was established in 2015 by Ketki Godbole, Ajinkya Chauhan, and Nikhil Rao. It's a young firm, just beginning to find their feet, venturing into towns and territories where the profession is unknown and yet are held by the belief and delight in the profession. Their presentation today is titled An Introspective Account of the Journey So Far. Our second set of presenters are Umesh and Prachi Wakle of Studio Roots. They burst on the landscape design scene 18 years ago and in a rapid succession delivered innumerable projects that were skillful, artistic, and sharp. Then after the initial glow, they slowed down, became more reflective, and started questioning a lot more about themselves and the meaning of their work. Their presentation today is titled Lessons in Landscape. However, before I invite our presenters for the evening, I would like to thank all of you, our audiences, who have continued to support us and this initiative for the last 6 weeks. And then I would like to thank our discussant for joining again today, Professor Vasalda, Snail Nagarsheth, Meghalarya, Professor Chaya. Dean De Cruz could not join us today at the last minute. Rajiv Katpalia, Carrie Preston, and Suneet Mahendru. Thank you again. Rahul Mehrotra, unfortunately, as some of you know, met with a bad sporting accident and is nursing broken ribs, but he was keen to join us today. Thank you all for nurturing and honing the conversations that have taken place through the series. And may I call all of you today to, of course, join in the conversation with the presenters, but also take a moment to reflect on this webinar and the last many weeks. And of course, a big shout out to our presenters whose work, told honestly with deep reflection, has become a lens from which to appreciate and understand the trajectory of landscape design in the country. And finally, at LEAF, the many people who made this happen. Vaidehi, Shalini, Shubhangi, for the logo and graphics that you've seen for the last 2 months. Thank you very much. And now, without any further delay, I would like to invite our first set of speakers, Bāghorama.
A very good evening to everyone. On behalf of the three of us, I would like to take this opportunity to thank and congratulate Aniket sir and Leaf for curating this unique series of informal talks that engage with the younger generation of landscape architects in the country. As a group, it has given us an opportunity to really take some time to think about why we do what we do and how our minds work. Thoughts that had been pushed back in our minds and decisions that were taken subconsciously were given conscious thought and really to introspect and examine their meaning. So today the attempt is to tell a story that talks about our journey and through which I hope we all will have something interesting to take away. So Ajinkya, Nikhil and me decided to embark upon this journey to unite in the form of Bāghorama Landscape Architects in 2015. The name Bāghorama is a play on the word panorama and the connotation Bagh, which is the local term for a garden. By it, we meant to connect ourselves with all aspects of landscape, but we're also looking for an identity which common people can connect with, while understanding and celebrating the interconnectedness of it all.
There is a local saying in Pune, means Pune lacks in nothing. And it is definitely does not lack the presence of landscape architecture. As new branches in this dense and mature tree, that is Pune, the search for sunnier territories took us to new horizons, places that were relatively unexplored but ready. Our diverse routes that stem from Kolhapur and Aurangabad became the catalyst for these. We decided to expand and consider opportunities to work outside Pune in towns like Aurangabad, Baramati, Kolhapur, Nagpur, Latur, etc. About half of the projects in our bag came from these loci. So moving away from the highly urban fabrics and transitioning into a much more open, a blanker fabric was really a good teacher, because it allowed us to work on projects and scales that were closer to what we have learned academically. Urbanity. It was an exercise in exploring and experimenting with ecological techniques and mass planting to bring about a change in the microecology. And it was a chance to work with convenient beauty through simplicity, bringing out the best by being resourceful. There were landscapes that created around the common open spaces of new communities where we designed a framework of the spaces. The skeleton, which was the hardscape, and the planting would fill up over a period of time. There were landscapes which were about celebrating the rawness and traditionalism of the local architecture, and the landscape tried to echo that architectural languages, also incorporating the existing flora on the site, trying to retain the genius loci or the spirit of the place. These projects also took about a new phenomenon that is seemingly happening in the country, where landscape architecture is attracting an increased interest and awareness even in smaller centers. It points toward an acceptability of the need for designed outer spaces, a willingness to create the spaces that are more meaningful. This is a new typology of clients too, with an increased awareness, in part because of the extent of social media, which has seemingly brought ideas of landscapes much closer. Meanwhile, in Pune, it was more about crafting urban structured landscape that were more about formality and minimalism. Like this rear garden, that was a new addition to a church. So, it was an interesting mix of design characteristics that unknowingly spoke about the genius loci. This brought up a few questions. For example, is there a certain typecast about the way they are supposed to look? Can urban gardens try to strike a balance of useful, functional spaces with the beauty of plant life and nature? How can we as designers open eyes and minds to the powerful impact of urban gardens that are talking about the untamed side of nature that are wild? How do we encourage the great proliferation of such landscapes within the cities?
So this really got us thinking about the importance of reaching more people with a view of creating understanding at their level about what value a landscape architect can bring. So we started writing about varied facets of landscape by engaging the users of the space directly through platforms like House and our blog. Starting off with topics as simple as attracting butterflies, bees and birds to the garden, it was an attempt to sensitize the minds towards the smaller joys of living, but also spoke from an ecological perspective. Gradually, the writings began to talk more about the intangibles and tangibles that directly impact the design experience. The effects of planting, lesser known plant families like grasses, demonstrating what they can bring to the garden, how to naturally incorporate sound in the garden. Through our travels, we also began to observe and record impressions that local gardens made. Eventually, the writings became about the plants themselves, talking about how there are plants for every kind of space and climate in India, the what and how of using them, using planting in a way that connects with people and commands attention. The result was twofold. The feedback from the readers was encouraging, to say the least, and we ended up becoming better acquainted with the strongest and trickiest material at our disposal, plants. Learning as much as we can about them, documenting them in a way that is relevant to our context, we have found is a tool that uncomplicates the planting design process to an extent, which in turn enables us to convey the design better to the clients. This was enlightening also because it meant us doing a lot of research and reading, which ultimately informs our sense of purpose and enriches and exposes us to the wider spectrum of the profession. What this also did was try to minimize the divide, the unseen divide, between landscape architects and gardeners. So we tried to embrace it rather than to let it annoy us.
Talking about processes, as a group, we watch a lot of shows like Love Your Garden with Alan Titchmarsh and Monty Don's series of garden travels around the world. They are wonderful in how they talk about the layers of history, cultures, and how everything can be juxtaposed to create beauty and coherence. For Ketki, reading about the poetics, history, and theory of landscape design are a fascinating way of expanding on knowledge, while Ajinkya excels in weaving these beautiful narratives that kind of takes the clients on an imaginary visualization of the landscape. So, the collective design process is a mix of all these things, plus ecological, local, and practical aspects, and combining all these things, shaking it up like a blender, and something comes out of that. With each of us complementing the others, bouncing ideas off each other, making work seem very little like work. As a team working cohesively, each member playing multiple roles like designers, client relations, contractors, laborers, publicists, and so on. Many a times we are reminded of anecdotes that Badesar shared during the lecture. On one such client interaction, we came face to face with a paradox when the client confessed that the only people who actually interacted with the garden space were his watchmen, drivers, and Mali. More recently, there has been a steady trickle of small projects in Pune itself, but which we realize are small only spatially, requiring the same or sometimes even more amount of thoughts that projects of greater scale would. People today are looking for moments of ordinary joy, such as coming home to beautiful garden and being able to sit somewhere peaceful and converse with neighbors and family. We are looking for that relief from always being inside and the ability to move outside, to appropriate the outside in whatever way possible. Evocative landscapes that are capable of bringing about lifestyle changes. And from this arises a need to design these really tiny urban gardens. These are spaces where children can play safely and celebrate birthdays. They are, these are spaces of relaxation and family congregations, places to grow food, and even spaces for working from home. The challenges they pose to us as designers are of different nature of varying levels, because sometimes we can handle large projects with relative ease, but large quantum of small projects is a different challenge. But their potential is great and one that needs to be explored.
In retrospect, we have come a long way in the 5 years or so since we started out. Some projects looked at landscape as art, some as forms of leisure, and some brought about changes in lifestyle. At the core of the process lies a deep sense of ownership, treating every project with individuality. Lot of simultaneous thoughts collide with each other, some through discussions, some through sketches, and some alluding to references. The design reaches that first level when it clicks, and clicks first and foremost in our minds. What we found is that there is no sort of formula when it comes to designing. It's all fairly intuitive, and that is what is best about being in this field. The intent or purpose at the abstract level remains the same, and that is design as a means of creative outlet, of self-satisfaction and happiness, of creating beauty by enriching lives. Slowly and surely, navigating through them, we look forward to many more meaningful projects and are prepared to go wherever the journey takes us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. So, I mean, it's at some level, I think it's very touching to see young practices and really the struggle of young practices in the country. So, how does one begin a practice? And I think some of us have gone through it, some of us haven't. I was, of course, lucky that there was a firm that I could come and start working in. But everybody else who started a firm on their own, I think know the struggles of starting the firm. And typically, I think either there are a lot of people who choose to go and teach in a local college as a way of sort of keeping the subsistence levels up.
Yes.
And the other way that is that you're occasionally lucky if an architect that who's doing good work chooses to repose some faith in you and give you work. But then what do you do if both of that is not happening? And what do you do if you happen to be working in a town that already has got a lot of landscape architects? I mean, Pune at some point of time had more capita landscape architects than any part of this country. I mean, I used to joke that you could throw a stone in Pune and the chances are that you're going to hit a landscape architect. So really, Pune has got so many landscape architects. And then, here is three of you, trying your best to get together, three friends. You work somewhere for a year and a half, and then you decide to branch off on your own. And clearly, the strategy in your mind was that Pune is not necessarily going to give you too much work because all that work is being picked up by people who are far more established. And then let me just go out to places that are my hometown or places that I came from. And maybe I have connections there, and then maybe I'll try and go and do some work there. The challenge, of course, is that when you go to that place, you find that people don't even know what a landscape architect is, and they don't want a landscape architect. So, first of all, that need needs to get communicated, created, and then converted into some kind of project. And forget process, forget resolution. Just the fact that you get a client who's willing to pay you or willing to hire you, sometimes perhaps not even pay you too well, is actually at times of something that you feel like you want to celebrate. And I can quite sort of I have empathy and I understand this sort of sense. And in that world, how does one keep the spirits up? How do you get to office every day because you're struggling and you still want the idea of landscape to be suffused? And in your case, I think it's a wonderful way that you go out and you look at landscapes and you choose to write with them and write about them. And that's a tool that you've chosen. The other that I think is interesting is that you're happy to sort of write for popular social media. So really, that's an area that most designers don't want to, you ask any designer to write something, they're saying, I don't want to write for House, I don't want to write for one of these media platforms. Because it's really usually not about serious writing. But on the other hand, I think that there is also the fact that as landscape architects, do we really spend enough time in communicating with the world and telling people, or do we live in a bubble? And I think that sometimes we live in a bubble. The third, of course, is, and Carrie is here, and Carrie, does that beautifully, is to really say, how do I change the nature of the practice? I mean, if I'm not going to get the big projects and the IT spaces and the workplaces and the large housing projects and the large urban projects, then I'm going to turn my gaze to these very, very, very small and tiny projects. And I'm going to try and create some meaning out of it and really open a huge possibility that remains untapped and unexplored. Because most landscape firms don't want to be doing 100 square meters and 200 square meter gardens because it is what it is, and I think you choose that sort of idea. And lastly, the idea of the practice. So how does a partnership work? So very often partnerships work where two or three people get together, but everybody pretty much handles their own end of the work, and they just share common infrastructure and they're willing to talk to each other. And here clearly it seems to us that you're drawing individual strengths from each one of you. Somebody's good at research, somebody's good at designing, somebody's good at representation, and you're sort of trying to bring that together and see how that practice is. So for me, this is a good reminder, a good way to begin to sort of see how this profession really will grow, but it will not grow by 15, 20 decent firms in the country. It will grow by hundreds of firms finding their feet. And I'm absolutely happy to see, well, the struggle that you're going through more than anything else. But it's a very honest struggle. So over to everybody. I mean, Professor Masavda, Chaya, Raji, Meghal, Snehal, Sunil, Carrie, please.
I would like to say something. So what I really enjoyed in the way you structured your talk and therefore naturally your thinking in your practice, that while on one hand you are writing about gardens, you are writing about landscape, so you are looking at what is the meaning of garden in the world where you live in. And on the other hand, it clearly shows that right in the beginning, you had stated this very clearly, and the name of the firm also suggests the same, that you are trying to look at the world as a garden. You're trying to have the lens of a gardenist kind of a lens to look at the world. And therefore, that I think provides the opportunity to look at the most seemingly insignificant situations that somebody may feel are insignificant. Yet, probably the most important platforms where you carry yourself, and therefore you are able to apply that lens of modifying or transforming the world from the grassroots. And this is what I think is pretty commendable, and it is filling in that gap, which Aniket rightly mentioned, that there are no takers for certain states, and therefore landscape architecture as discipline does not organize itself to reach there. So that is one thing that I felt quite happy about, and naturally the other follows from there. So in fact, one of my questions to you is, because you talked about these two terms, landscape and lifestyle. So in these projects which are domestic in nature in particular, to what extent does lifestyle impact the gardens that you make? And on the other hand, to what extent the garden defines the lifestyle you create and therefore change some of the ways of living of the residents who use these gardens? So my question is really, how does the brief come about? Is it a translation of the lifestyle into a garden, or is it the idea of bringing about as a proponent what garden and lifestyle means, and therefore elevate or modify the way that these domestic users look at landscape space? So these were the two things that I thought we should wonder about. And the third thing that I'm not repeating again, but we started off from in the first episode of the series, we had started to talk about the word called struggle. And for the last series, I'm happy that Aniket brought it up in all its shapes. So whether it is holding up a partnership, whether it is having work, whether it is having clients, having so on and so forth. So if there is any more that you would like to really throw light on in what it really means to remind each one of us sitting here of their days uh, romanticizing with this struggle. So yeah, these are the three things I thought I should bring about.
Thank you, Sunit sir. So regarding your first question, we try to have a lot of conversation before we start with the designing process. We have a questionnaire sort of thing which we throw, especially for these smaller projects, and we try to understand what the client is looking at to gain from doing up this landscape. Maybe it's a terrace or a backyard. So what is their current lifestyle, and what could we add to it in the form of a garden, other than the aspects, the benefits of being in the outdoors, the psychological benefits. But other than that, what can we really get them, which will really add. And this has been especially significant in the past year, because a lot of them were working from home. And so there was a very great need of a getaway space, because the home was functioning as everything. So looking after kids, dealing with office work, coordinating everything else in the house. So there was this big need of just getting away and being in your own personal space to get some work done and remain sane. So this then was one of the main kind of concerns that we try to deal with in these smaller projects.
So I'm going to ask Carrie just, so Carrie, if you're there. So, I mean, those of you who've seen Carrie's work, and if you've not, you should, she really, really works on this incredibly tight spaces and creates this world. I mean, I sort of remember her in her talk saying that she listens very carefully to what the owners want, and very, very carefully. So Carrie, do you want to walk us through what?
Yeah, well, I was watching and seeing a lot of similarity in both philosophy and approach, and I was very happy to hear you talking about the ordinary moments of life and joy, and that it wasn't just focused on the plant life, but how people are really using the gardens to have birthday parties and for playing children. And I think these small domestic gardens, they get looked down on a little bit. And I think, but I think so much of life happens here. And I think I often personally make the analogy between poetry and prose, and that I think landscape and the larger things are much more prose, because you have to think about very different things, and there's potential for real poetry in these very tight spaces, like a haiku where every single syllable counts. And I see that thinking in your work a lot. I took a lot of notes because it's very similar. Can I ask, because you're writing for House about this type of garden?
Sorry?
You're writing, I was hearing you're writing for social media and you're writing for House.
Yes.
And can I ask, like, what type of articles and discussions are you having?
So we are only writing for the gardening part of it, the gardening part of House. So all the outdoor spaces, and it's like container gardening, and how to make a small space look bigger, and what are some unknown or lesser known plants, and what can they add to your small space. Or in urban areas there's a lot of problem of shade, so because everything is very tight, so not many outdoor spaces get a lot of sunlight, but there are plants that grow well even in those shaded areas. But what are those plants? So we are talking about such things, and really trying to get out some bust some myths about what can and cannot happen in a small.
And a lot to sort of just encourage people to not be discouraged and to try. Yeah.
And just demonstrating that your small space can be something much more than just a lawn or a hedge.
Yeah.
You can
But
have you can do so many things with.
I'm curious because in English, the word garden almost sort of refers to more the lawn and the herbaceous border, and
Yes,
in
that's
and in
what
Dutch,
image it invokes. Yes.
yeah, in your language, in Dutch, it's just the space by the house in general. How is that in your language? Is it the whole space?
So the word Bagh, if you see, has a lot of Mughal influence, like the Mughal gardens which you see. So they were before that it was more of domestic gardens, which were more talking about functional, so productive and functional, no purely functional spaces, which were all these small spaces. And then when these kind of bigger Mughal gardens and all those were about showing, reflecting your power and showing your strength through the area and also through what they could do.
Yeah,
So it's a mix of both then, depending on what is the scale of it.
because I find the way the language frames the concept really affects the way people have that relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I really, especially the one garden that you showed with the plane in the background, and you were talking about the birthday party. I was like, yes. Yeah. So I'm really thrilled to see this happening because we're equally dense, our cities, and this is where life happens, so much of it. So
Exactly, and that is where so much of potential lies, which
yeah,
is currently not it's a little ignored. So
exactly. I'm really excited to see what you're doing. I'm going to follow along. I'm going to see if I can find you on House and see what you're writing. So
yeah.
Harry, I would like to add something to the question that you asked. I would like to add to the answer. So, the fact that you talked about gardens in our language, so I would rather replace that word language to culture. And I would say that in India, to before, so India has seen a very multicultural kind of an environment, and a lot of people who have come to India for whatever reasons. They may be called settlers, they may be called invaders, they may be called anything, but they came and made this their own, therefore brought something and added a layer. Before any of that happened, the connotation of the term garden was really finding one's place of beauty and reverence in nature. In
that's
nature.
interesting.
And that meant ascribing intangible and symbolic meaning to everything that you find in terms of landform, in terms of water, in terms of vegetation, and therefore each and every component, most plants, most forms of water, everything had some sacredness about it, which if you look at today in a practical sense, then you find that there is a lot of ingrained wisdom there, because when you say that there is a river and you call a river by the name of a deity, and most often rivers were looked at as goddesses, so had a female form. So there is a reason for that. Reason is that the river nurtures and a mother nurtures too. And because the river swells, it floods. Therefore, you have a floodplain and you have an area where you naturally don't build. So you have a reverence, you have a sacredness, you have a fear, and therefore you have a logic of preservation and urbanization, in a
Yeah.
in an inherent way in which culture looks at things. So
Yeah,
that was
and the
an
way you
important
frame the
point.
archetype of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was an important, I think that's an important value which is ingrained somewhere in the Indian psyche, which is able to look at. Now, I would not like you to reflect upon the current urbanity and ask us questions on that.
Another time. That's another time.
Can I ask, because I see you cautiously dancing around it, I think. How much of that was lost through English colonialism? And
Gary,
their
that's
understanding of garden was
no,
I
Gary,
don't
I'm
think
going to send you Sunit's mail ID, and Sunit, I'm going to send you
It's a
Gary's
big
mail ID.
discussion. Okay,
That's a
sorry.
conversation that we're going to do off here.
Okay.
But Chaya, Meghal, Snehal, Professor Vasavda, Rajiv, please come in.
Okay, yeah, sorry. I can imagine that being a big discussion.
Who would like to come in?
Yeah,
Chaya?
can I? Yep.
Yes, of course.
So I think two things that struck me. One, that you are working with very small personal spaces where the people who live there are most probably going to take care of them.
Yes.
And the other is that it's in locations which are of very different climatic and geographical conditions. So what you're really, I think the opportunity which I sense that you're seeing, but I'd like to articulate it a little bit, to think about the garden as an activity rather than an object or a space which has been decorated. It is not a thing, it is an activity. Now, because all your writing tends to substantiate that also. And I think that's a very good whole area which landscape architecture professionals need to build on, to say this is an activity. Get your hands dirty, get into the garden, and also that it's not just sitting in that space which gives you relaxation, it is doing things in that space which gives you relaxation. I think all of these messages you should make stronger and stronger in your work as you go along, especially in today's time. Yes.
Jai, I'm going to ask you a question just to expand on it, because I think you're onto something interesting. So the problem really is, of course, that landscape architects or any designer wants to leave his sort of mark on a project, right? I mean, that's the nature of our ego. So would you think that it's possible to leave the mark in the manner in which an activity is prescribed or a ritual is prescribed, but there is no physical marking? Or do you think that it requires some backbone, some structure, some skeleton to get created within which the flesh can wax and wane? I mean, so.
Yeah. Again, I would refer to their statement about changing a way of life. That the landscape architect should aim not to change only a space, but a way of life through dialogue with the people who are going to live there, and through that structure the kind of activities and also the kind of hard infrastructure that comes about as something which I think as we go along, we tend to become more and more interested in the long-term memories that are left rather than the flashy and quick messages that come through in object-like images. And I think this is what their work, as it grows, I see a potential for it being something in that area.
Rajiv, Meghal, Snehal, Professor Vasavda.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
haven't got I mean, I'm still sort of struggling to say something, but I think, Chaya, that's a fantastic sort of understanding of what life is actually. It's whether it's landscape or it's even architecture, because I think we made a fetish of the image of something that is fixed in time. And actually what you're talking about is life unfolds, daily rituals unfold, and gardening or even living is a set of things that keep changing. And it's sort of, I find that idea really, really exciting. So I thought I should just sort of bring that in to mention that. But yes, I think that'd be a great way to sort of examine a whole lot of stuff that we have been talking about.
No,
Very
absolutely.
true. Huh? I think I must say that they've struck a chord with me when they say that they're going to look at the idea of the ordinary, because I live in a house which is a very, very small garden, and the manner in which the house is structured is that it's not inside, but it's pretty much outside. But the garden is really ordinary. I mean, it doesn't have much exotic, and it has, and it keeps changing, because when it was younger, it had, I could manage to grow some things that I could eat. Today, it's become difficult to do that. So it's really interesting how my engagement with the garden is so much more important, because it has built memories of the kind which, without the engagement, was not possible. And I think if what Chaya mentions is becomes something as your kind of thrust forward, it would be really special, because it would really mean a lot. And I think that is really wonderful. But I have discovered some plants grow and some don't, and it's a wonderful, it's a joyous thing to do. And all three of us in the morning are picking up leaves and are working. And I think otherwise we don't do much work. I mean, most of the time I'm stuck to the screen.
Yeah.
So it's really fantastic.
Yeah. And I'd just like to add, I've seen that older people, they walk in a garden in a different way from children. Children climb, jump, do all kinds of maneuvers. But the older people, my grandmother used to walk around the garden, touching every tree one by one for maybe half a minute. And then taking a plant and just caressing some one leaf. And then that was her morning. It was done. And this kind of thing, I think the visual is something, unfortunately, we have to use a screen, but we can't get that experience. And I think your work, this Bāghorama's work, really should build that direction. I can see a potential there, which is really wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Asavda is there? Yes.
I had problems in between.
Oh, okay. Did you miss some of the presentation or?
Yeah, I think I missed Chaya's,
Oh,
and I could get into snails. But anyway, I was actually quite interested in what Carrie mentioned about the prose and poetry. Because I think this is something, which even this three must try to reflect on, because I think the way she said that in poetry, every little word or syllable, makes a meaning. And so is in the garden, or what they are calling as bagh. So that is one thing, which I thought was quite a revelation for me, because I think that comparison was really very good. The other thing is that this team is trying to sort of explore their own potential and working on parallel on 2-3 different things, which I think is also an advantage, you see, when they are three. Because normally what is considered is three as a crowd, and two is a company. So I don't know how far that is going to really affect them, but it doesn't seem to be affecting them now. So I think this three-pronged approach, to their work is also very interesting. And especially, when they are writing, I think it is something, which is of great value. And that could be a good contribution from them, to the profession also. But how far that writing is something, which is disseminated, and how far that is used, you see, in order to generate, the sensibilities of the clients as well as general. I think it is something, which one would really like to know more. And when they are doing this, I think Carrie's comment could be very useful, to think further about this. So this is something I was not, I could not really appreciate very much their work, because I think it was not really explained in more detail. You see, I would have imagined they did that. But I think in terms of the presentation, I think the way they presented is quite good, which I sort of liked. So I think I have this much to say.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. So, Meghal, before we move on, is there anything?
No, I think a lot has been said. So I just
You still have the last word.
there's just one thought that comes to mind, and which is that they use the word intuitive way of working with the land is what they're working with, and I thought that was very interesting. But at the same time, because they're also writing in a way demands a certain degree of explicitness and a certain degree of analyzing what you're doing. So I'm very curious as to how they have these two things happening together, because I often find that conflict going on in myself. So it's very interesting to see that they're, and maybe probably it's because they divide it or somebody's a little better at something. But the fact that you're saying that design is an intuitive process, and that at the same time you engage a lot in writing, which actually demands a certain degree of explicitness. So I thought that was interesting for me, apart from, of
So,
course.
I think they can correct me, but I think that the bulk of their writing is more about specificity about the things to do. So what kind of plants to use, or what kind of container gardens to do. So it's really directional sort of writing. It's not
It's
it's not really yeah, it's really that. But correct me if I'm wrong.
No, sir, you're right.
Yeah, because to be able, I think then if that is the case, it might be worthwhile to see if they can explore writing in a more different way, in terms of trying to understand writing as a mechanism for design. You're already doing this in some
No, but Meghal, just to, I mean, it, but just for general sort of consumption right now, even today, the best books on gardening that we have in the country are those written by people like Percy Lancaster, or people like that. So I mean, it's really the British who came to the country and who wrote the simple things about how do you pot a plant, how do you dibble grass, how do you create manure, what kind of secanter do you use for what. I mean simple things about how do you work in the garden, and there is very little conversation about that. Equally, I mean, there's very little conversation about that in architecture too, but very little conversation about how do you actually do things. More and more we are all becoming designers who can draw stuff, but if we have to actually go to the site and even begin to try and execute what we draw, well, most of us would suffer quite bad.
This idea actually comes to me also. I mean, and exactly what you're trying to say, Aniket, is that for example, if like what Snehal said, all of us enjoy dabbling a little bit with, and you've seen what we do also, Arya and me sit and do in the mornings, evenings, whenever, little tree grows here. I do wish though that, over a period of these 8-10 years that we've been doing this, we would have kept a journal of sorts, that today I did this and what happened, or tomorrow, because a lot of things we learn through trial and error, if I may say. And I think that what they're doing, if even if it is the kind of instructional writing that you're saying, even if it is done on a regular, almost like keeping a journal basis, I think there will be a lot of value to learning that we may eventually be able to put together.
Absolutely.
I think that the idea of this kind of journals, particularly with landscape, where I think that it is not eventually as deterministic as architecture can be. And that, I think, like what she was saying, that some plants can grow in shade. Now, somebody can only understand that after having done it innumerable times, and what kind of soils and all of that. And I think that's a lot of knowledge over there, which is particularly to me a gap which when I go hunting for stuff, I don't find.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else, or should we move on? Sorry. Yes. Sorry. So, please go on.
Just agreeing, and I was saying that is the ongoing attempt, because
Yeah.
when we write about this, we have to first, really study it and try it, or something. So some kind of research goes into that, and only then can we,
Yeah.
write about it. Okay, this will work.
Yeah.
So yes, it's an ongoing process, but that is very much the intent.
Keep at it, and I think enhance its intensity.
So you've got a lot of advice coming your way. I think we are going to do a catch-up seminar 1 year from now to see how much of this have you really followed up. But I'm just joking.
One last bit. There was a very interesting word that they used in their presentation, and that was a questionnaire. So they said that they make a questionnaire for their clients.
Yes.
I think this could become a PhD work. If one could really expand on ideas about how to build a brief, or how to bring in participation between a landscape architect and a user, a promoter, through a questionnaire which touches upon facets that you can, unlimited facets that you can think of. I think that can be a very, very valuable contribution, and I would wait to see it being published somewhere in the near future.
I'm now really feeling bad for these kids. The pressure is just too much now, clearly. I think we should leave them, let them enjoy the rest of their Saturday. They are done with this, and perhaps we want to move on to the next one. So let's move on to Umesh and Prachi. Let's go there.
Good evening, everyone. We were initially quite comforted for being invited amongst the young practices. While there's a lot more experimental and inspiring work being done otherwise, why were we here? Well, let's accept as individuals we aren't all that young anymore, but the firm, well, yes, is still struggling like an amateur day in and day out. Ironically, 18 years isn't much. The current friction being making a choice to stay as a boutique practice to imagining the organization with an independent identity has been a challenge. Apart from a certain kind of perpetual self-doubt one strives with when in a creative pursuit, sustainability appears to be an obstacle of high order in a society driven by economy. Yet one continues to grow and learn. To these eternal learnings, hence the title, Lessons in Landscape. The Heisenberg principle of uncertainty states that you can never simultaneously know the exact position and the exact speed of an object, because everything in the universe behaves like both a particle and a wave in motion at the same time. Thus, rather than being self-consumed or complacent, this seemed like an opportunity to converse with those who have believed in us or influenced us. To gather a perspective on the practice and the profession in general, we decided to inquire with a few near and dear ones who have either collaborated or mentored or contributed in shaping us as individuals or been catalysts in our practice. These are bare glimpses to find out how they think of it. Tip of an iceberg which will remain highly grateful to many more who aren't here but matter to us as much.
He's been agricultural background from our family. Landscape is integral part of our lifestyle. Being a nature lover, I used to trade, so those influences were there in my mind.
I was brought up in a very scenic small village on Krishna River. The name is why. These things or these values and the things which you see around get inculcated in you. It just gets embedded in you.
From the childhood, I used that hobby from the beginning. Wherever I go, I will try to pick up the plant.
Every weekend, we used to go in forest. One of my professors actually inspired me. He told me do you know Vidya Raghu?
My school is on a hill. It has a lots of trees. There are many grounds, like a football ground. And I don't know why, but there are 2 basketball grounds. I love to go to Bhutan and to see the lion, tiger, deers and kangaroo.
If you travel in plane early morning, 6 o'clock, you will find that what is landscape.
Architecture is only about building and inside it, but landscape architecture is around the building. Like the swimming pool, the trees, the shrubs, into the right place so it looks good.
Basically, a lot of efforts first go into something which is not safe. So basic hydrology, subsoil water and all that. So they take care of all these things in the initial stage itself. Then comes to design, utility.
Antenna should be always on in terms of architecture. Like when you go into restaurant, you should not see at the menu card first, but then you should see the interior ambience.
There is also a very diverse field which deals with creating ambience, initiating a lifestyle.
22 years back when we had designed a washing place, in a landscape, that person was so happy to wash utensils. He is proud of that place.
The landscape architects can do a lot in bringing the nature into the city.
Most important part is what they think about their own profession kind of dictates how what kind of work they do.
When we were traveling in Bali, in some of the hotels, the farming itself was the landscape feature. How the farming can integrate with the landscape.
Taking about the Google images, then mapping, then taking measurements of any particular area is not something which environmentalists would easily do it, because we look at the ecological indicators, know how to document it, but creating a structure out of it and bringing them all together and fitting in the human needs at the same time in a given natural ecosystem.
आता ही पॅव्हिलियनची आयडिया माझ्या डोक्यात नव्हतीच. की बाहेर आपण बसायला गप्पा मारायला आपलं वाटतं लॉन पुढेच आहे चिडाकला बसलो, पण ते ऑल द सीझन पूर्ण वर्षभर पण बसू शकत नाही उन्हात किंवा पावसात वगैरे असेल, म्हणून पॅव्हिलियन म्हणजे मोस्ट हॅपनिंग प्लेस.
मोबाईलवर बसून मी म्हटलं की मला असं असं पाहिजे आणि त्याला परफेक्ट करू. उमेश हॅज गॉट अ एक्सलंट ग्रास्प. So basically, तो artist. Whenever you convert landscape in an art form, then there's a value to the landscape.
माझं एक आधी हे होतं की लोकलच मला झाडं पाहिजे, खूप एक्झॉटिक व्हरायटीज किंवा आउट ऑफ द प्लेस बाहेरच्या कंट्रीजमध्ये झाडं पाहिजे असं काही कन्सेप्ट. मग एक कन्सेप्ट त्यांनी जो दिला मला की घर तुमचं जे आहे ते चारी बाजूने दाट झाडांनी असं वेढलेले असेल, तर चारी बाउंड्रीजना मोठमोठी झाडं त्यांनी केले. तो कन्सेप्टला इन्स्टंटली पटला. नंतर घर तुमचं म्हणे जोपर्यंत आपण त्या गेट जवळ येत नाही तोपर्यंत दिसणार नाही म्हणे काही वर्षांनी. The elevation should become non-elevation and it should merge with the landscape. So that was the basic idea. Then I think that next project was done in my crew, and then there we tried a different concept with Umesh, because there the very orchestrated landscape was there. In the lawns there were strips and all that. Totally contrast in terms of landscape was there. Later on, some larger project came, and fortunately Umesh was with us. So that time he was not married, so he used to stay more in Nasik. That was a good, kind of joint process of
all day, from morning 9 o'clock to evening 9 o'clock. Dad is just working.
I think it goes back about 4 years ago when Prachi shared me a wonderfully written, very studious article by architect Aniket Bhargava on Sabarmati riverfront. She started coming to our different activities on the river banks. She started understanding what are the, what exactly is the thing which is going wrong with the river. I would say it's a give and take.
I started working 17-18 years back with Umesh. We like to understand from us also, with the main architect, with the client. Best part, he gives the freedom to the contractor. I must have worked 100 projects with Umesh. And one thing, he has to deliver the drawings in time.
I almost worked in 2-3 international firms after that. I'm thankful to Roots that it made my foundations strong. I think it was the best decision I have ever taken.
Roots is special. I can only say that I've grown as a landscape architect.
Unfortunately, landscape comes at the end of the project, where client has finished his money.
आमचं एक roughly 50,000 रुपयाचं हे आहे महिन्याचं. म्हणजे मॅनपॉवर खर्च जास्त आहे आपला. बरोबर आमचं आयडिया अशी की सेल्फ सस्टेनेबल पाहिजे. म्हणजे हे थोडा प्रोजेक्ट जो आहे की आपण किती पैसे खर्च करतो दरवेळेस. आता आपण काम करतो किंवा कमवतो म्हणून ठीक आहे. पण आता समटाईम वे गोष्टी काय तेव्हा तो खर्च आपल्या अंगावर यायला नको.
But whether a client is going to spend or not this end material, I don't consider how much they're going to spend or not, or they're not going to spend. We submit our proposal with a bold and daring.
Earlier we used to do complete model of the bungalow with the landscape, so that image is carried further till end.
I think there cannot be a budget. Just consider ITC Kohinoor has a green wall of 3.5 crore rupees, green wall and green roof, whereas the landscape budget was on the ground was 85 lakhs rupees.
I see the irrigation changes from hose to the cloud.
Every season it should give some or the other trees should either fruits or flowering or foliage. 3-season planting plan in terms of bird habitation, in terms of fruitfulness, in terms of usefulness, in terms of aesthetics.
All these big projects needs the horticulturist and landscape contractors in a very large way.
Even the Constitution gives us this. Section 51A(G) also gives us a responsibility towards conservation and protection of the natural services which the nature has given us without having anything in return. Conserving and protecting nature and restoring the nature is everyone's responsibility.
Initially, it was just ground. Then we started having indoor gardens. Then we started having roof. Then wall. And now the latest is using voids. Irrigation has become now very important, and frankly speaking, it has gone to a level of 100% automation.
Daringly you have to design. See, you have to submit the proposal, they will hypnotize with your ideas.
As naive as these conversations may have seemed, we gain our insights from these everyday realities and we forge ourselves. These very grounded and simple expectations is what we thrive on and tread our paths. After all, we do believe that God is in small things. But what were these insights? Well, they were about creating memories and associations, they were about being responsive to the environment, about adapting with changing times, or infusing values of art and culture where one can. It could be about rethinking architecture or even experimenting with plant material, finding solutions that surpass budgetary constraints or our ability to refrain when one can fall prey to the conventional, or the most recent of reclaiming nature in urbanity. And there would be many more such. Yet, still the question was, do these gains reverberate with our work? If yes, how? So, through these lenses, we tried to revisit a few projects close to our heart to gain an insight into whether they translated these values. So for example, a project such as mine, where one is involved from the site planning process, we attempt with the suggestion to reducing the building footprint, which is duly accepted and respected. From a conventional landscape layout, an ambitious landscape plan is made, the building gets executed, but the landscape never happens. Yet we continue to do what is well taken,
land in which we find joy. And sometimes you're so consumed with what is on your board. Beautiful campus of about 20 acres in a setting that is so beautiful. You're so engrossed creating spaces that would be memories for students coming in the future. Because you do it well, you continue to bag more projects of similar scale in the vicinity. Only to realize over a span of 10 plus years with 3 different principal architects to comprehend that you're getting equipped for a 200 plus acre site. In the process, handling a site of 200 plus acres, over time to offer ecological binders. Feels like things are coming to a full circle. And yet continue to experiment, work with native grass species, over time learn changing volumes because of the growth of plants. Or at times an unexpected turnout of events, a case where one devotedly owns the responsibility of an incomplete architectural block due to lack of funds. Plinths and columns were constructed and landscape took the responsibility to make the site look complete. An affordable and experimental planting palette, minimal planting palette, just everything falls in the right place and gains you a credible recognition. Or at other times where you have had consciously refrained from going overboard even when you had the freedom to aspire to do what only is bare essential to justify the sanctity of the architectural function as well as the sculptural quality of the build. Landscape is very understated, so knowing where to stop is also as much essential.
Yeah, so projects do happen when like-minded people come together in good faith and make them happen. Few which do not see the light of the day also have a lot of learnings to offer at various levels. As such, these engagements are extremely dynamic and many a times these externalities are beyond our control. Each project can't be everything, but we have to accept that it becomes more meaningful when comes in a context. To reinstate all such ideas, one requires sensitivity, ability to nurture fearlessness, flexibility and conviction. A firm belief in what we do at that point in time, stay true to your position and we may hope that it may come to a full circle. So to sum it up, the next and last part of our presentation is a tiny fable. As landscape architects, trying to decode nature is one task we are constantly engaged with. While discerning human behavior is yet another struggle we go through while committing to a practice. The term nature has super layered meaning. Can drawing allegories help us learn of one from the other? It is up to the listener whether it chooses to interpret it either as a project idea that one conceives or as an individual's nature on which most design practices are built upon, or as a nature of an organization that is driven by certain values and principles, or as an aspiration of a fraternity or profession that now sits on a threshold of vulnerable times. It's called the seeds of aspiration.
It's called the seeds of aspiration. A seed had been laying in the dark for a while. It had managed to survive and penetrate the soil. It had been precautious, a hard-shelled one it was, protecting the soft core inside for a cause. Yet there wasn't much around to fall back on, a barren canvas of land where the darkness of the sky merged with the cracks on the ground. It waited for the perfect weather, the right temperature and sunlight, a moment to come out of plight. The sun shone brighter and the monsoon showered generously this time, soon to become a sapling with a curious mind. Along came the seed of grass, very swaying and light. Wonderful, so now we've got some company, said the sapling with delight. It grew some foliage, a tier above and a branchlet below. It tended stem strong and stable, thus into a tree it was soon maturing. The grass was adaptable, not strong and stiff. It would perish in summers and reincarnate with a whiff. With roots fibrous and shallow, the blades changed colors from green to yellow. Unlike the tree, it's streaked by laterally spreading, surely a tree free spirited mind. Now there was some shade and the soil a bit moist, delicate ground covers began to show. Then came herbs, shrubs, and bushes, swift and quick to grow. Few others settled, and no sooner they sprouted, the wild flowers mingled flawlessly with the grasses. Bugs, butterflies, ants in a row, cobwebs, lizards, and worms below. Quite a busy picture. Aho! On a tree that flowered and fruited, the chirping birds came to borrow. Some flew over the cuckoo's nest, while the others stayed back in the hollow. The growth at times bouncing, at times sluggish, but mostly exciting, blending in with the summer, winter, monsoon, and spring. Over time, while the girth increased in diameter, the grass spread further to meet the edge of water. To see a variety of reeds, skippers, and over them damselflies, an encounter with the birds which floated and dived inside. Overjoyed was the grass with this moment to seize, they all sang along and swayed by the breeze. Later that night, the grass trolled back with the news, smiled to self as the tree would be amused. Well, said the tree, it's the same water that flows underneath. But now there's work, more fruiting needs to be done. Bigger birds are soon to appear. Slowly the trunk became hard and strong, the ever so expanding horizon it longed. There's more to seek in less time, there's lots more to know, and the branches said they will help grow. Oh, what a miracle! The roots below ground, now in the air, begin to show. And this anchored the tree even more. Well, the birds, they did arrive, migrated from far off places. They told stories of lands dense and green and those other trees they had seen. Some had broad, thick, glossy leaves, whilst the others were neatly stiff. The tropical ones were moistily nice, and the conifers belonged to the higher lands with ice. Taller than the tallest, greener than the greenest, the way they describe one would rather despise. But the tree barely knew other than its stratum, a few like-minded ones beyond the undulating datum. As it emerged to have the vision of the surround, they exchanged smiles amongst the grasses abound. Few occasional chats and some encounters deeper, over time to reveal their unique character. Some had textured barks or an articulate branching pattern, some bloomed profusely in spring, while the others changed foliage in autumn. Some growing this from the seeds the tree earlier bore, and that was so reassuring, wasn't it, my dear? To meet during sunrise, discuss the weather, to converse over dusky evenings and become a bit wiser. Here it was, the world we sought that felt like Tinseltown. The changing hues of beautiful skies were now appreciated even more. The grass sprung back. What's an ecosystem, it asked. All beings in harmony with each other? You are a tree, an anchor for many. From where it all begins? Oh no, and it never ends.
So, a metaphor which teaches us the value of a practice one tries to imbibe. Although complete in itself, its existence bears more meaning and relevance when part of an ecosystem, which in turn also ensures its sustenance. So, practice is the seed, the tree, and the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Prachi. Thank you, Umesh. I mean, the demon of the internet finally hit me because I was struggling with sound and there was a bit of patchiness along the way. So listen, I mean, I have more than commenting on the work. I actually have questions of you. So I know the kind of work that you do, and it's extremely accomplished. And I have had a chance to actually go and see some of the work that you've done in Nashik. And this was early days. And, I think as Sanjay Patil says, maybe it was those days when Umesh wasn't married and he was living in Nashik. And, maybe that gave him a certain kind of freedom. And I was honestly taken aback at the kind of work, because for somebody so young to do this very, very articulate, very definitive work And I remember telling you that I thought it was great work. And then, there was this whole bunch of sort of projects that you did with Sanjay for many years in Nashik, and I'm sure elsewhere. And then somewhere along the way, I think you started doubting yourself, or started questioning yourself, or started wondering, what is this whole business of being a professional? And then I see your presentation, and I see you trying to get sort of feedback from contractors, from clients, from people who work in the office, from your own children, from all kinds of people. And you don't really want to show your work too much. You want to sort of hurry through the work, and you really want to sort of do this illustration driven poetry or prose in the end. What was going in your mind? I mean, what is it that has been going in your mind? Tell us this. 18 years is not a small period of time. It's a very, very long time for most firms. So what has been going in your mind? Just tell us right now, and I think that will allow us a better conversation.
First of all, I thought this is not a place where we need to show our work. So that was the initial beginning idea. Second, rather it is more of discussion. What is the current scenario, or what is the future of this landscape, or what are the trends, or how people are experiencing the situation. So that was the initial thing, and that was a very conscious decision. Yeah, we are not here to show our work as a coaches, but generally we should discuss, look forward, or how we need to carry the practice, do the work, or like looking forward. So that's the reason. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit. I mean, you've posed the question that you sort of asked yourself, and forget the presentation for the moment. Where do you see yourself? I mean, where do you see yourself? 18 years back, you started doing a certain kind of work, and now today, it's 18 years, you're sort of being reflective, introspective. There's a little bit of soliloquy happening here. What is it that you think is your place in this profession, and this place in the way that you want to conduct yourself? What is the dilemma?
No, I feel obviously 18 years is a long period of time, and what I've experienced through the time is that, see, most of the works which even we have done, or like I've been doing, or like those are beyond your control. I mean, like, number one. Secondly,
you said they're beyond your control. Is that what you said? You said they're beyond your control?
Yeah, most of
Quite
them.
a few aspects of a project are beyond
Second, I feel there is no philosophical setting, even us as well. We need to really thrive upon the ideologies, or like philosophy that one has to. What I mean to say is, I see basically, someone can relate Laurie Baker's work, someone can relate Charles Courier work, someone can relate some stalwarts and architects their work. So when I look at Pan India, and we see, can we relate any landscape architect work? Okay, this is a philosophy that someone is advocating. Can I relate? Okay, this is my philosophy as an architecture or as a landscape architect. Can I put up? Oh, this is what something which we believe into it. What I see is most of the people who are working, everybody has the same pattern and a generic way of working, and that disturbs me a lot. Eventually, and that's the reason I started. After initial work, I felt there is a little doubt in our own work, and I think yes, we need to go back and we need to do retrospection. We need to really look into our work, really uh, see everything. What are we doing? We are just merely doing a landscape and gardens and lawns and plantation. There is no design, high-end design kind of philosophy or like pattern or something. And that's bothers me. That bothers me a lot, and that is the reason. One of the things I felt we have to really relook into the way we practice. So that's the major thing still hurting me a lot. Most of the project has been executed nicely, but okay, that's not the point. I think we have to really look into all these things uh, in terms of philosophy.
So if I mean, I'm just sort of retrospecting on the last 6 weeks, for example, and we've seen a whole bunch of people, young people, some of them much younger than you, doing work, and either they have a very strong way of looking at the idea of ecology, or some people have a very strong way of looking at the idea of working with their hands and making do with what was available locally. Some people have a very strong way of sort of connecting back to their memories, and sort of finding a way of being able to respond to those embedded memories and sort of create something out of that. We just saw Bāghorama's work and the whole struggle of beginning to say that, how do we start engaging with very, very small sort of gardens and do it. So would you think that's the kind of trajectory that you think has got the direction, or even that's not working for you?
So I think these are most of the time mincing with the word. I strongly believe into it. Rather than actually looking into physical, I say ki let us, if somebody's work, if we see their work without hearing their voices, and we have to look at, experience their project, and then you have to judge whether it is really project means to that way, or just merely words are there. So that's the thing, and most of the thing, that's the reason I said I feel ki most of the project in all over in India has a similar kind of patterns, or they are not fundamentally striking. A very handful of project I'll say ki they are totally different and very profound kind of
Full of thought.
full of thought and something.
Right. Chaya, do you want to come? Chaya, Rajiv, I'm going to call Sunit a little bit later, because I think, it's an interesting space and an interesting space to comment on, not so much on the profession, or not so much on their presentation, but, just what happened after their conversation later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, this searching for a sort of more definite relation to our work. I think this is what we are talking about.
Yeah.
It could go in two directions. One could be that we remove bit by bit all extraneous material till we come to a sort of abstract understanding. But the other, which seems to me to be very, very strong, is perhaps also something to try or to pursue. I'm thinking that every Indian tree suggests a kind of tangle. It suggests a kind of robustness. It suggests a kind of some different words maybe, which they are not very neat. Most of our trees and our plants and our creepers especially create a kind of tangled sense of space. I wonder whether paying more attention to the peculiarities of our rather special forms of material could give another view into this philosophical idea. Because, for example, recently somebody told me that the Bibhatsa is the entry into the Adbhuta in our rasa system. That means the disgusting or the is a way of getting away from the world into the wondrous, into the Adbhuta. And I wonder whether this kind of thing needs further exploration of the whole system of thought, which allowed all these kinds forms of nature to persist. Right in the middle of the city, you will find the most horrible looking tree, an umro in Gujarati we'll call it, or some such tree which doesn't fit into the urbanity at all. And I wonder whether this kind of exploration, because it seems to me that what you are saying you do not accept requires a deeper investigation into the materials of our work.
True.
That's my feeling.
Rajiv, thank you, Jai. I knew that you would help in the conversation. But Rajiv, something that you want to, say here? Is Rajiv there?
I'll wait a while.
Yeah. Carrie, Professor Vasavda, Snehal, Meghal.
Well, I'm trying to understand because I saw some very, very beautiful work, very graphic, and I'm glad you brought it up because I definitely noticed that, like, it was sort of like, here's our beautiful work, let's take it away. And so I'm still trying to understand, like, have the projects after years of being there not developed and remained what you hoped they would remain? Or is it more that you're questioning? Because I really appreciated the graphicness in your work. It was stunning, and so is it modesty that you think, no, I want to talk about what it means rather than to showcase what I'm doing? It is sort of like you don't want to toot your own horn, or is it that you're disappointed in how the projects have developed through the years? What's I'm still not understanding what happened.
No, it's not that. See, during my several conversations, I like works of, say, Martha Schwartz, and during some discussion, what I realized is there is like poetry in landscape, or like satire in the landscape, or like comic in the landscape, or like there is a drama in the landscape, or there is a flow in the landscape. So we have been talking about all sort of emotions. We then we had attained a workshop where people have related architecture, lands, and films, or any other arts, and there are several similarities they had shown. Okay, cinema and a landscape is same, or like the way cinema has been done, same landscape has been also been done, and the kind of emotive things which can generate in a cinema, we can also just do the same kind of emotive thing. And these things inspire me a lot. And when I look at back into our works, those are, of course, they are good works. I mean, they are recent works, not recent. They are good graphics, they are nicely executed. But then I started looking at, can I have satire in my landscape? Can I have horror in my landscape? Can I have other emotive things in the landscape? And can I really explore that? Of course. So then I suddenly find, of course, yes, there is a lot of to be done. It's not just merely executing good project, but I think there has to be really celebration of the works that really we need to do it. And that is the reason why I said this. This is like after 15 years of practice, I'm looking back, and we are really looking for those emotive or like other kind of expression from our landscapes, what we do exactly. And that's why I said there has to be more.
You too caught up with the architectural build that we've been trained to or groomed to, and we kind of we've been carrying it on for long. Either it's I mean, I should not call it baggage.
So that's what I'm saying. It's not about modesty or something, but yeah, something that we should look forward more than.
So is it sort of like, your work's good? Let's talk about where you want to go and go deeper, and you want to just more talk about these deeper emotions and these other ways we can approach it.
Absolutely.
I get that.
Executing a decent project, I think that's beyond. See, we are here to discuss beyond than what just merely in executing a project, a nice, decent project. The project should have ephemeral qualities, or like they should have different meanings. And if we talk about it, then
Because
that's where we are enriching our profession.
So, Umesh, I mean, I have to recount this little story because it has stuck with me. So there was a point of time when one of my clients in Bombay had commissioned Renzo Piano, and he wanted to build a very large performing arts center in Bombay. And I used to go to Renzo's office to liaise and look at drawings and stuff like that. So in one of the earlier meetings, this client had come with me, he's a young person, and he walked up to Renzo and said, really, I mean, we want a masterpiece to happen in Bombay. We need your masterpiece in India. And of course, Renzo smiled at him and said, I have a friend who makes films. And every time he wants to make a film, he wants to make a blockbuster. And, he starts making the film, and most of his films aren't blockbusters, and they flop. And occasionally, one of them works. But the only thing I can do is to work seriously, sincerely, and put my heart in it. That's the only thing I can promise you. I can't promise you the outcome, but if the spirits are good and we work in a circle of virtue, then maybe the outcome will be good and maybe it won't. So I think, the expectation of what I will do will be good. To decide that, or to even get into that conversation while you're doing it or before you're doing it, to me is premeditated murder. You are killing yourself, literally, because that's really not, according to me, you immerse yourself with everything that you think is important for you, and whatever that is, so whether it's horror or joy or laughter or poetry or whatever it is that you think is important for you when you're beginning to think about that project, is what you do. And you do it with the purest of your heart, with the honesty of your conviction. And if it turns out good, well, very good. Drink a glass of wine. And if it doesn't turn out fine, you learn and you move on. And that's the journey. So I've heard this from you for some time now. I mean, it's not new, right? I mean, I've heard this now for years, this way or the other. And I'm trying to wrap my head around this angst that at some level paralyzes people, right? And it's something that, it's a long discussion, but, that's really where I'm coming from. But Rajiv, do you want to say something now? Yeah, Rajiv.
Yeah, it's. I think again, I won't come to the specifics of the projects and the. I'm. What is it that really drives us?
Yeah.
To do whatever we do, and I think that's the question that we all come to grips with. We all think about it very often, and the experiences through time sort of in some ways clarify, you simplify your thing along. and perhaps it also becomes more complex because you simplify things. That's a contradiction in terms, but that's really you. I'm trying to think of an example how to explain that. I mean, it sounds rather vague, so I'm still trying to figure that out. But yeah, I sort of agree with you that what is it that drives us, and that's something that right through your journey, through all the different experiences that you keep on trying to figure out. Hey, how is this going to turn out in the end? But how much do I experiment? How much do I open myself to possibilities, and where do I sort of stop? How do you take those decisions? And some are measured, some are intuitive, but it's something that I think that's where we should have a dialogue about that. How do we take decisions when you're working on something? When you say it's enough, and this is what I should stop at, and what is it that drives that decision?
Yeah.
I don't know if that sort of helps the conversation.
Yes, of course. Meghal, also, you've attended a few of these, also this is the last session. So do you really want to, sort of talk to Umesh and Prachi, but also try and summarize the last few weeks?
Thank you, Aniket. So I think, first of all, I must appreciate the kind of deep honesty of the conversation that both of them have brought over here. We do spend a lot of our time trying to, I mean, I'm not undermining everybody else over here, but I don't think we do have adequate, honest conversation. So in that sense, definitely appreciate not only them, I think every firm that has come over here on this platform, unlike many public domains, have been very honest about what they're doing, and have been very direct and have not tried to wrap it around with many kind of other extra words and all, which is in a way very positive for the way forward, because I think only the honesty of conversation can help us even address things that we need to address. So I must really appreciate both of them and the entire series for the kind of issues, the kind of things that they've brought out in the public domain. How it will go forward, I think, I mean, we can always give advice like we were trying to give to the previous bunch, but that will, I think, over a period of time, every one of us may reflect on it in different ways, and collectively I think it only brings good to what can move or take forward. Being a little bit more specific to them, to Prachi and Umesh, in terms of trying to find a way forward, I think all of us go through this phase that at one point, you do a certain amount of work and then you sit back and wonder whether have you done anything meaningful at all in everything that you've done. I remember watching Bhimsen Joshi's interview once on TV, and somebody asked him this question, that how do you approach the stage and what do you do? And he was talking about self-doubt every time he approached the stage at the age of 82. So I think self-doubt and being honest about self-doubt is absolutely all right, as long as it is a way to move forward in some direction. I think it will become very hugely problematic if it starts becoming paralytic. So I think I would caution them not to use that as a way to become paralyzed about what they're doing, but find a way and continue doing. That's very important. That's what I would like to add.
Absolutely. Professor Masada, would you like to, you've been there for all 6, maybe you missed one, maybe, or maybe you were there for all 6. Would you also like to sort of try and summarize the last 6 weeks?
Certainly. I think Meghal spoke very well. I'm very happy. I would like to pick up one point, which she mentioned, is a point when one comes to self-doubt. And I would really like to understand that point. You see, when you come to self-doubt and then having arrived at that point, what is your further course? Because to me, in that really lies the strength. Because I think one may say that, well, one is failing, fine. But then the failure gives you a tremendous lesson. So in a sense, I was extremely, sort of interested in, attending this last presentation, because the title itself made me very happy, because I thought that, well, someone is going to talk about lessons from landscape. And this is something, which I was looking for. And if that is something, which was really talked about, I would have been very happy. Because to my mind, in a sense, that also would have been the summary of the entire, this 5 or 6 weeks. Because I think we have seen many, many projects. And though I consider, architecture as something, which is all inclusive, I thought, when one looks at architecture from a different viewpoint, that also has tremendous richness. So I was very happy to attend all these 12 presentations. But the last one is leaving me with a desire to get to the lessons of landscape. I would only say that. But otherwise, I think the presentation, I'm sure they have done this presentation to convey something to us. Now, I would consider that if I could not understand some of it, maybe that was my difficulty. But I would feel that the entire series, the way you have planned, was extremely rich. I think mostly, the presenters were also happy. I am also very confident that Umesh and Prachi are also happy. And they go from here with some kind of joy to work further. And, the only thing is that someday I would certainly like them to talk about lessons from landscape. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you, Professor Vasavada. And as a good concluder, I like the way you set us up for the next webinar. So to say, we need to do one more series because there's so much that we've not covered. And I think that was wonderful. I mean, that was really prime time. So thank you very much. Suneet, you've been silent, and you should conclude, and we should call it the end, so to say.
Or the beginning, as Professor Vasavada just suggested.
Yes.
So I would just there's nothing that has been not talked about the wonder of the series that we have been through. And one point which was covered very well right now was the honesty with which the heart of the presenters came out. Coming back to Umesh and Prachi, the way they've presented today. So I would like to take on the other aspect that they talked about. So everybody has addressed the self-doubt very, very well. And I think Meghal and Aniket's comments were right up to the mark. One thing that I would like to pick on rather, so there were two things that Prachi said. One was about, or I think Umesh said, that one was about the fact that when he looks at work that has been done through the years, he does not seem to find an inspiration, or he does not seem to find something to talk about, or something like that. So now you see, there are, just like self-doubt has two directions in which one can go. Likewise, a like or a dislike for the way things are a very powerful force which have a forward momentum and the potential for forward momentum. Because if fortunately I'm able to feel this way, that I don't think what is being done or what has been done is worth talking about or has something that takes a leap forward in the future and has meaning, that means that I am the fortunate one to open the stage, and I have really nothing to really hold me back if that is the case. So I would like to see that kind of a protagonistic approach rather from this feeling of I would take the liberty of using the word repulsion, though it is a very strong word. So that is one point that I felt that a positive, forward-looking, contributive way is something which needs to be opened with this. The second point I would like to talk about was where it was being said that what if we were to remove the expression of writing or thoughts of somebody who has engaged in a particular work from the work itself and then judge. So my reaction to this is a little, I mean, I must say that being judgmental is something that comes naturally to human beings, but it is like, you know, a part of the lenses one wears to look at life in general and one's environment. But the other thing that I felt from there was that in any creative profession, we are very fortunate to be in a profession that is about art, apart from many other things. In any creative profession, it is not the work itself, it is not the product that is created. It is rather the growth of an individual, the feelings and emotions one goes through and is able to capture in writing most often, because the written word has a very strong power, and that becomes a force for experimenting further, and that is what keeps one alive. So the fact that the work may be discerned differently depends on the life state of people who are looking at it at different times. But what is very, very important is, what did I go through? How has this opportunity changed something in my life? How have I been able to use the written word or an expression as expressing a desire or expressing a poetic thought that could have myriad expressions? But in the ordinary ways of seeing what is a functional setting or an activity, this word infuses the emotion that keeps the artist going. So I would say that that is a very, very important part of our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. That was good. So without making a big deal out of this, I'm going to say keep the conversations alive, keep the circle of virtue alive, and thank you everybody, and thank you audiences, everybody who's come week after week. Thank you for all the 12 firms who really have come and really talked and bared their heart, showed us really some wonderful, wonderful work, but also allowed us to think a lot about the profession. And of course, all the discussants who've been very indulgent and have come week after week and spent several hours of their time. So thank you everybody again. And that's the end, and that's a wrap. So please have a great weekend, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon. Good night.